Thank you, Shabar Saab, and we would like to come back to you on documentation. Actually, it's a very important issue that you've raised. Now we request Mr. Asad Ali Shah to give his views on the budget, please.
Thank you, Rashid. I think we already have broader views on the economy from Saqib and Shabar's views relating to documentation. Let me first of all give you my comments on the way I see the economy and also what this government has been able to achieve in the last 3 years and what are the positives and what are the negatives. I think I largely agree with Saqib's analysis. I think, first of all, credit should be given where it is due. And I think credit should be given to this government that it has achieved at least one objective of stabilization of the economy. Because 3 years ago, our foreign exchange reserves were around $6 to $8 billion. Our growth rate was 3%, and economy was in dire straits. So compared to that, when you look at $21 billion or $22 billion foreign exchange reserves, one of the lowest inflation in the history of the country, around less than 3% also we touched this year, one of the lowest interest rates ever in the history of this country, and very robust tax collections. For the time being, I think let's forget how the tax has been collected, as Shabar pointed out, but if you look at the overall collection, 60% increase in the last 3 years and 21%, 20% increase this year, 3 trillion rupees worth of tax collections. I think these are significant positives which this government has been able to achieve. Overall GDP growth rate, I think there is some controversy about the growth rate also. Government is claiming that it's 4.7% growth rate, but SPDC and some of the independent economists are saying it's around 3%. Today, interestingly, there is a World Bank report. They are estimating the GDP growth for current year of around 4.2%. So, in my judgment, I think when there is a negative growth in agriculture, which pervasively impacts the entire economy, I think 4.7% growth is maybe slightly exaggerated. So, I tend to agree that with the World Bank's estimates of around 4% growth. But even 4% growth with stabilization of the economy, is significantly better than, what we had 3 years ago or 4 years ago. However, as mentioned by Saqib also, the question is, when we have achieved stabilization of the economy, when we have $21 billion in foreign exchange reserves, when the interest rates have fallen to 7 or 8%, is this the right growth? I'm sure, I think most people will agree that the potential for this economy under these circumstances would have been or is much larger. We could have achieved easily, I think, 6% or 7% growth. We should be aspiring at 7% growth, because when you compare us with other economies, when you compare, India is growing at 7.5%, even Bangladesh is growing at 6.6%, Sri Lanka is growing at between 5 and 6%. So we are the lowest growing economy within the region. Although I think when you look at the natural resources and the potential this country has, as I said, we should be growing at the rate of 7%. So I think from that perspective, the growth of 4% is far below our potential. It should not be acceptable. And I think we need to evaluate the reasons why we are not growing at the rate of 7%, And some of the reasons, I think, are the basic fundamental issues and the governance issues and the lack of decision making and, ineffectiveness that we talked about the business community and the think tanks to persuade our decision makers to take the right decisions. I mean, if you look at, we are growing at 4% despite of the fact that we are having $46 billion worth of investment commitments from China, CPAC. So overall, when you look at the overall investment scenario also, the investment to GDP ratio compared to last year has remained stagnant, or rather it has declined. And the FDI we received was only $1 billion. And if you analyze the FDI, this year more than 50% of the FDI was from the Chinese investors, almost 54% compared to last year's 20%. So I think from that perspective, if you look at the economy from the investment perspective, I think it remains at a very, dismal level, very low level, because if you exclude the Chinese investment, that means the investment from the domestic investors as well as investment from all other countries other than China has drastically declined during the year. So that is, I think, a negative aspect, a worrying aspect. Another key inherent issue or profound issue of the economy, which is making our growth, sustainable growth, questionable, is very low rate of savings. Now, Pakistan's rate of savings to its GDP remains at 15%. I don't think you can have sustainable growth when you have 15% rate of savings. I don't see there is any country in the world which has achieved sustainable growth with 15% savings rate. Now compare it with even the region. Forget about the developed economies and China and Japan and other countries which have very good savings rate. When I compare the savings of Pakistan with Bangladesh, for instance, in Bangladesh, savings rate is 28% of the GDP. India is 30% of the GDP. So the question is, how do you achieve sustainable growth? Now, I think we can all understand that we cannot achieve sustainable growth without investment in our economy. Now, investment has to be largely financed by the savings, domestic savings. Now, if our savings is so low, that means we are only dependent on foreign investors. That is the only way this economy can grow. And unfortunately, we are not getting any foreign investment other than Chinese investment. Now, that may be a very positive thing. We have talked a lot about CPAC, all the good things that this CPAC will do to this economy. It will provide us energy, it will provide us infrastructure. But the most worrying aspect of CPAC is when you look at the rates of returns that are being offered. Out of $46 billion of CPAC, nearly $34 billion is in energy. And assuming that significant portion of that investment is coming in the form of equity investment, we know that the rate of return, the IRR in the energy sector is 17-18%. And infrastructure projects also, the returns are like that. So the thing is, if you're not getting cheaper investment from other countries and we are only confined to investment from China, at the rate of 17, 18%, when the interest rates have gone down globally, virtually 0%, So is that the right economic decision? That is a fundamental question that needs to be debated, because we say a lot of good things. I know there are a lot of positives in CPAC. It will provide us energy, and when we'll have, two factors that have impeded our economy are the energy and the law and order sector. So both have improved also, and the government should get credit on that also. But the thing is, when I look at the future, the CPAC at 17, 18% IRR, whether that is sustainable for Pakistan as a nation, and also consider this, that our savings rate remains low at 15%. So that means if we have to, because if we have to grow at the rate of 7%, then we have to have the investment to GDP ratio of 3 times of that. So around 20% of the GDP has to be the rate of investment by rule of thumb, or 21% has to be. So all of that will come from the foreign investors, and if that has to come at the rate of 17, 18%, I think I am a worried person. So I think these are my comments on the economy. I have few comments on the earlier comments also. Saqib, I agree with all his comments except one comment. He said that it is difficult for the economies to grow when the fuel prices go down. That is true for those economies which are exporting oil. But I think for economies that are importing oil imported economies, that was a bonanza actually, which has one major reason why our economy has been stabilized is the low fuel prices, which has stabilized our foreign exchange reserves and our current account deficit as well. So I think that was one bonanza and one positive factor.
No, sorry, just to intervene. I didn't say that. I said it's difficult for the revenue to be raised when the oil prices are down.
Anyway,
not
if that is
that. Sorry, just to...
So that was a positive factor.
I don't want to be beaten on that point. I agree with you. Low energy prices are very
then
good
it's okay. I think that clarification. So that was one bonanza, one reason why we have been able to stabilize the economy. You also talked about the effectiveness of different forums, and I totally agree with you. Our forum of ICAP and our committee has not been that effective, as we saw from the comments also. And one proof of why we are not effective is that you will be surprised that we are one of the highest taxed community in the country, because the withholding tax on services is exorbitant 10%. Now 10% on revenue, just imagine. You can imagine what will be the effective tax rate if you are earning less than 20% of our income. So this is, I think, that shows how ineffective our voice is. So I totally agree on that with you. With regard to Shabar's comments that it's a cash budget, I think, yes, it is a cash economy. We know that we have a very informal economy, so obviously we are a cash budget and cash economy. And surprising thing is that, we as accountants talk about accrual-based accounting system. And despite having an accountant, chartered accountant as a finance minister, we are not able to convince him that we should have accrual-based accounting in the government also, and not cash budgeting system. I have one other thing, I think, which is a major impediment for the economy. You see, basic policy measure that the government has for mobilizing investment and reviving growth is the fiscal policy. Because monetary policy is largely done by the central bank. And in fiscal policy, basically what do you do? One basic thing